Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 210. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the evening of Friday, March the 5th, from the James Strong studio in Western St. Charles County. My guest today from South Carolina, where it's a bit warmer than here in East Central Missouri. He's a podcaster. He's a homesteader. He's an activist. He has his own podcast. You may be familiar with it. It's his name is Matt, and he's host of the Vote Matt podcast and the Half-Ass Homestead podcast. Is that the name?
Yep, that's right.
Very good. Welcome to the Strong Show, Matt.
Thank you for having me again.
Now, I was on your podcast over the summer.
Yes, sir.
I was traveling through South Carolina on business. I had a hole in my schedule, and I happened to look down, and I saw that I'm going to be real close to Camden, South Carolina. I thought, that's where the Vote Matt podcast is from. We got together, and I was a guest on the Vote Matt podcast, and I had a good time.
Yeah, you came to the undisclosed location deep in the heart of Kershaw County.
Yes, I did. You've got two podcasts. You've got the Vote Matt podcast and the Half-Ass Homestead podcast, and one is nothing like the other, correct?
No, they're totally different. They, I guess philosophically, they kind of tie in together.
They do.
Because, political happenings can affect what happens on a homestead.
Well, let's start with the first podcast you had, the Vote Matt podcast. And it kind of, the whole Vote Matt movement, I guess we'll call it, in South Carolina, which is for those in that area of South Carolina, they know who you're talking about. And I know a lot of my listeners aren't from South Carolina, but trust me, Vote Matt is very much a regional force in the area. But it started as a Facebook movement, correct?
Yeah, it was actually just a joke. I guess they call trolling.
Well, go ahead and tell the story. It's an interesting story how the whole podcast began.
Right. So I was living in the county, doing my thing, raising my family, working, and I noticed our main road going through town, the traffic over the months, there was just more traffic and more traffic and more traffic. And I noticed that it was the people from the next town over cutting through our town to get to the interstate. And that town was Camden. And so I just started calling them Camdenites and telling them to stay on their side of the river, use your exit, clogging up my roads. And then then I started really looking into why are these people coming through here? And that led me to the conditions of roads. Basically, the town planning of Camden kind of forced people to come this way because it's extremely inconvenient for them to use their own exit on the interstate.
What makes it so inconvenient?
There was no stoplights, so there's a lot of accidents down that way.
Okay.
You have to wait in line to get on the interstate there. There's no real on-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a strange situation where the people would just say, well, it's easier, just cut through, go across the river, go through Lugoff and use their exit.
And people like water take the path of least resistance.
Right. And then they just follow the flow. And I believe our exit's 9 or 10 miles closer, the way the interstate curves around the county.
Mm-hmm. So
it's just easier. And it was just annoying to me. So I started making fun of them. And it just escalated from there. It was weird how people thought it was funny. Other people hated my guts. Then I became the unofficial mayor of Lugoff because we're unincorporated. We don't have a city council or mayor or anything like that. So I just claimed it. And I'm the mayor now. And then I changed my name. I started saying Vote Matt for mayor. And
even though there is no mayor of Lugoff, South Carolina.
Right, correct.
So it was kind of a goof.
Right. And then, but of course the Camdenites don't have any sense of humor. So they were like, I would never vote for you for anything. And, I'm like, ma'am, do you realize, or sir, do you realize there's no mayor of Lugoff? this is a joke, but please stay off my roads. um, and over the months, this vote, they're like, vote, Matt, what are you running for? Are you running? I'm like, I'm not running for public office. Like, I don't need that headache. I've got 2 kids and dogs and a job, and why would I want to be elected to anything? Um, so this vote Matt thing took off a little bit, and because I started exposing some of the weird and backwards dealings of the local government, local county government, and the sheriff's department. Then it got to where people were messaging me saying, "Hey, I've had this situation happen," or I know somebody I can get you in contact that had this, and then I started the Vote Matt Facebook page, and this whole time I'm completely anonymous. Nobody knows who I am.
Sure.
On Facebook, it's just my first name, which happened completely by accident. I don't know how I did that. And then the Vote Matt thing takes off, and I meet a friend in a local Facebook page, made friends with Mike, my co-host, and he's the producer. And we started talking. I was like, man, I'd really like to start a podcast because the Facebook thing is too impersonal. It's too easy for people to just shout back and forth and make no progress.
Right.
Plus, there's no outlet in our county for local news. We do have one newspaper in Camden, but it's really just a fluff paper. They just, we call it the propaganda wing of the Camden elites, which is really what it is. It just spreads propaganda about how great the government is doing things in our county.
No local radio stations, of course, no television stations, just too small.
Right, just too small. Land-wise, we're a fairly large county, but population-wise, we're not. So that was the Vote Matt. We started the Vote Matt podcast.
And what did you deal with on the Vote Matt podcast?
Pretty much everything that you could think of. Local politics, Luciferians and the New World Order and aliens and Bigfoot. And I think when you were on, we talked about, was our Luciferian show.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
That was kind of the height of the
symbols.
Yeah, that was at the height of the Jeffrey Epstein thing was going on,
right.
and some of the QAnon stuff was going on, and it was an interesting podcast. I had a good time, and refreshments were served, I must say, and that was a good part of it too.
That's definitely a part of our show that I like. We will test and taste a new whiskey every show and give our opinions of it. And it's just a good time. I really enjoy it. It took us a while to find our voice. Then things started to get heated with, like, the elections were coming up. People were getting really scratching and clawing. And I started to see, like, we're really just spinning our wheels on the show, talking about too many different subjects. And I just wanted to stop. I didn't want to do it anymore. I just kind of wanted to take care of me and my own and my friends, and whatever happens outside of that circle, I'm not worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the half-assed homesteading show came about, because I still enjoy doing the podcasting. So my fiance and I bought some property out in the country, combined our houses and bought some property with a house on it. And it's not a true homestead. That's why we call it the half-ass homestead, because we have a house here and a garage and a workshop,
sure,
and a yard with a fence. So it's kind of a halfway homestead.
But you're trying to do what you can on your own where it's feasible.
Right. So we raise chickens in our backyard. We have a garden. We're going to have a couple pigs show up in about 3 weeks, and that's going to be our biggest leap into homesteading.
Hey, I assume you have no neighbors.
No neighbors. We're on 38 acres, and we're surrounded by thousands of acres of nothing.
Okay.
But then we started talking about, well, this is weird. Usually you'll hear people on YouTube, they're 100% hardcore homesteading. Like move out to the middle of Alaska and do that.
Right.
Which I'm like, okay, that's cool, but we still have jobs that we work, and we still want to be a part of society. We just don't want to be dependent on that society.
Or at least as independent as is possible.
Right.
Right.
No,
I mean,
so
you're still plugged into the grid.
we have electricity.
Exactly. So,
and that's it though. We have a well, and the only thing connecting us is our power.
Okay.
But we have, high speed internet out here.
Sure.
Way far out. It's like a wireless, AT&T wireless high speed internet out here.
Okay.
Show.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was saying that show was productive because we met a lot of people in the area with a lot of good skills, and we kind of formed a little group that we help each other out. If I'm struggling with my tomatoes, there's somebody in the group who is really good with tomatoes, and we can lean on each other for that sort of stuff.
And you did that with Mike as well, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mike was, and Caitlin, my fiance, she joined in on every show pretty much, because this is her homestead as well. And we still talk about homesteading. Now the Vote Map podcast is back. I think the first show we had back, we pulled the clip from The Godfather. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me right back in. We started the show with that because, boy, our sheriff here is something else.
And you've kind of, I don't want to say you've changed the Vote Map podcast, but you've you narrowed it down, and it is strictly now very local. Kershaw County politics.
Yes.
Not no more Trump talk, no more Biden talk. It's the local stuff. It's the sheriff. It's the state rep. It's the county council. That type of thing.
Yeah, because ultimately, no matter how many executive orders President Biden signs, it really doesn't affect me that much here in Kershaw County, South Carolina. But what our county council talks about on a Tuesday night every other week will directly affect me and my homestead. And the meetings, there's maybe 2 people show up to the meetings to listen to these people talk. And I was like, wow, I'm shocked. Like, I don't know why I was so surprised, because if I'm not going, who else isn't going? Probably everybody. And I actually, it's kind of a hobby of mine, politics, and I don't even pay attention. So that's what got me back in, and me and Mike talked like, okay, we're gonna distill this, and we might dip into some areas of other interests if it has something to do with Kershaw County.
Well, and this is not an anomaly. The fact that small local politics aren't really frequented by people. I know years ago, I'm talking probably, close to 35 years ago. About 35 years ago, I was involved in local politics, local government in North St. Louis County. And I had a meeting with State Senator Ed Dirk at that time to just show how long ago this was. At that time, the whole region was practically all Democrat. If you weren't a card-carrying Union Democrat, you weren't going to get elected to anything. And Ed Dirk was just that. And I was talking to him about certain local matters and all this kind of stuff, and he truly wanted to listen. He did listen to what I said, and then he said, if you want to get something done like that, he said, write a letter to me, to anybody else. He said, you'd be surprised how few letters we get, how few people even care. Yeah. And this was before the internet and all that kind of stuff, before social media. So if you wrote a letter, that's how you got someone's attention. I said, well, I don't want to just write a letter. It'll get lost. He said, it won't get lost. He said, a second time, you'd be shocked at how few letters we get. I said,